Hello, listeners. This is a very special and exciting episode of the Biophilia podcast. Our guest today is the one and only Dr. Jack Kruse. Jack is a very important person in my personal life, and from our opinion, he is also very important for the direction in which modern life on this planet will head. In our conversation, Jack goes very deep into the mechanisms of ADHD and sleep disorders. In fact, he explains how almost all modern diseases have the same root cause. He backs this up with modern science and knowledge from Einstein physics. Furthermore, Jack explains why biophilia is the key for living a longer and healthier life in all aspects. We have to listen to this episode several times because it's so filled with information and resources to back everything up. After doing this, we are going to provide a summary episode in German language in the next weeks, as we want to spread the important message of Dr. Kruse to everyone. Enjoy Biophilia, enjoy listening to Dr. Kruse. Hello again. Welcome to Biophilia podcast.
Welcome from me as well.
Hello, we speaking today again in English language. And this is a reason. We have a reason here. We have a guest here, and it's the most interesting guest so far in our podcast. We mentioned him a lot. It's Dr. Jack Kruse, also here in El Salvador, and Dr. Kruse is a very important person to me, as you already knew, and also for Lars and our journey to biophilia to connect more to nature and also understand how we connect more to nature and be more in our inherent connection to nature. And before I talk too much, I would love to let Dr. Kruse speak. And yeah, Dr. Kruse, hello from our side. And please give us a little introduction, who you are and where you come from and what you're doing now.
Yeah, my name's Jack Kruse. I'm a board certified neurologic surgeon. That is a brain surgeon in the United States. I live now pretty much permanently in El Salvador. I've done some work for not only the government in El Salvador, but also the government in the United States. I crafted a constitutional amendment that has been given to both countries. That's about medical freedom. And I guess I've pioneered the concept and idea of decentralized medicine. Most people, I think, in Germany know what centralized medicine is. That is big pharma medicine that is based around nuclear DNA and RNA, that paradigm in biology. The paradigm of decentralized medicine is radically different. It focuses almost wholly on mitochondrial DNA and energy production and thermodynamics, and actually how the changes in mitochondrial DNA affect the nuclear genome to get the diseases, the health span, and the longevity that we experience or don't experience, through our actions on our choices through our own environment.
Muchas gracias, Lars.
Yeah, Jack. Our podcast is based on the connection to nature, and maybe you could shortly talk about what does nature mean to you and what does the connection to nature mean to you.
The connection to nature to me means everything. Without a connection to nature, this is exactly how you wind up with the chronic disease epidemics that we have globally. Everybody seems to talk about them a lot in the United States, but the same diseases that are present, in the United States are also present in Germany. They're present in Asia. They're present in Africa. They're present everywhere. In fact, when you get right down to it, the evidence for decentralized medicine and a connection to nature is actually seen, and I think every German who listens to this will understand it. It's actually seen in ancient Egypt. This is the shocking revelation that the people who built the pyramids, so that means the workers, the laborers, these are the Anubians, About 15 years ago, we dug their bones up right outside the Sphinx, right next to it. And we looked at the bones, and it was remarkable because the bones were sent to a guy in the University of Arkansas named Peter Unger, and he saw that the muscle skeletal system on these skeletons were perfect, and the skulls, the dentition, perfect. And then we looked at the elites at the same time. And those people were buried in sarcophagus. Remember, they lived inside in temples that had artificial light, and they had all this fancy garb on. And when
Mm.
we CT scanned their skeletons, we found out they had the same diseases as the people of the United States and the people in Germany. Why? Because they weren't so connected to nature like the people who built the pyramids. So
Mm.
when people say to me that this is a holistic idea, no, it's not. It's a decentralized idea. Why? Because nature is designed around decentralized energy throughput. Once you understand that energy is the source of health and longevity, then it gives you a completely new paradigm. Like I like to say, I don't know if you have in Germany things that we put on the window called Windex. It's Windex on your
Mm.
glass eye because many of the things that you were taught to believe, now you have to question when you have this. And I think, everybody globally knows the story of the ancient Egyptians, but I don't think everybody knows the story of how the people that were the heavy laborers that were outside at the 28th latitude in the sun to build the pyramids, they were in spectacular shape compared to the people who ordered the pyramids to be
Mhm.
built.
Yeah. Yeah, super interesting, and I can see it even today. Like people who live the more comfortable way have even more problems than people maybe here, even in El Salvador on the countryside, who live kind of poorer life. Yeah, very interesting. And you were talking about energy and the importance of energy. And we always said in our first episodes, Lars and me, that we want to bring a new perspective to health, and we are obviously no physics experts as you are, but we would like to hear how, by example, energy is understood in a biophysical perspective compared to a biochemical perspective, and why biophysics is so much more important and missing these days.
Well, I think the first thing I think I should do is put some names out for people
Mm-hmm.
who will be skeptics or who don't understand the science.
Mm.
And I will tell you the names and why they're important. First guy is named Dr. Doug Wallace. He's at
Mm.
the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. He's the world expert
Yes.
in mitochondrial biology. So obviously, you should read everything that he's ever written. Another guy that's
Mm.
very close to where you guys are from, Nick Lane. He's a biologist from University College London. He is a strict biochemist, but he's now starting to enter in to biophysics. He's also very interested in cosmology. He's beginning to understand some of the things that I've been teaching people.
Mm.
Uh, his number one book that I think everybody should read to get a good background is called Power, Sex, and Suicide. Spectacular book about
Mm.
mitochondria. Third guy is a guy here in Boston in the United States. His name's Michael Levin. Another guy, Martin Picard. I believe he's in Ontario.
Mm.
He's also a mitochondrial researcher. What these two guys are very interested in, they have been studying the bioelectric resistance of the intermitochondrial membrane. So, what have they done? They have focused much more. Like I look at Doug Wallace, he's out here, Nick Lane is here, and then these guys are right on a
Mm.
specific area, and they're
Mhm.
looking at different things. And when you take those three lenses and mix them together, you begin to see a side of biology that I think it's first principle thinking. You go from the things that you know that are published in the textbook that is true in the United States, it's true in Europe, it's true in Germany, but then you begin to find where the edge of the science is and where it leads. Like, what else do we know? Because what's the problem with centralized science everywhere? These these scientists are in silos. They don't
Yeah.
tend to talk to each other too
Mhm.
much. So it turns out what you need to understand is how the science of Doug Wallace, Nick Lane, Martin Picard, and Michael Levin all mixed together. And it turns out I'm that guy. I'm the guy that puts them all together So it's almost like the end of the Da Vinci Code when you see all the pictures come through, and then we sit down on a podcast and you say, Jack, why are the people in Germany sick who have this problem? Like in your case, Benny, ADHD. In Lars' question, Jack, I take care of a lot of people that have sleep disorders. Jack, if decentralized medicine has some wisdom, are those two things linked together thermodynamically? The answer is yes, it is. Now, most Germans who will listen to this, like, wait a minute. When I go to my doctor in the hospital, they don't tell me how these things are linked. Are you saying, Jack, that these things are linked by hardcore biophysical axioms or rules that are based on the laws of nature that are not subject to randomized controlled clinical trials? Actually, that's what I am saying. Exactly, 100%. The problem is you need to understand from first principles how to think about these issues. And if you do have, I would say, maybe a high school or college level biology understanding, you'll get it. I know if you have a high school and college understanding of physics, you also can understand it. The real quantum leap that you need to make is to understand how these branches of science actually link together. And the way I like to tell people about it is that biology really isn't a fundamental science, and neither is chemistry. Physics is, and both of them plug into physics. So what our job really is to understand why NASA, when they send people up, or the European Space Union, they have three metrics. The three metrics to look for life: light, water, and magnetism. So how do these principles in space unify on terrestrial Earth for the people that you see and Lars sees, and obviously the people I see? So I began this journey 20 years ago in my own practice, okay? And where did I start? I start at the evolutionary framework that everybody knows. There's three domains of life. The three domains of life are archaea, bacteria, and eukaryotes. I think everybody knows that. The most interesting part, before the Cambrian explosion, which is when complex life showed on the planet, that's when eukaryotes came. We have to look at archaea and bacteria and understand that the way that they used to make energy across their membranes is radically different than we do. And predominantly that was done in an anoxic environment when oxygen wasn't present. And what happened there, they used to use metal ions, but eventually they wound up with something called a Warburg metabolism. That's effectively what they did. And why is that? Because there wasn't a lot of oxygen present. What magically happens over that time frame? Well, about 2 to 2.4 million years ago, when you read Nick Lane's book, you'll learn about this thing called the Great Oxygenation Event, where it started in the oceans and then eventually filled the atmosphere around us with what it is today. And it turns out that that Great Oxygenation Event actually caused endosymbiosis, where an archaea and a bacteria merged together to make a eukaryote. And what else happened at that time? That's where mitochondria came from. So what did mitochondria effectively do for complex animals? It allowed them to harness more solar energy to build more complexity. That's the big story. Now, the really interesting part is, how does that story scale all the way to us? Because that's what you guys are interested in. You're not interested in the history.
Yes.
So something else happened that I think most of your German audience will know. 65 million years ago, the big dinosaurs that used a lot of oxygen to live, we got hit with an asteroid in Mexico. And all of a sudden, the little animals that didn't use that much oxygen, that lived under the ground outside the sun, those were called mammals. The dinosaurs went away, and the mammals exploded over 65 million years. And it turns out that they were able to do things that the dinosaurs couldn't do. Why? Because what changed in the environment at the KT event that everybody knows from first principle thinking? An asteroid hits the planet, and all the dirt from the ground goes up and blocks the sun for a period of time. We don't know how much or how long it happened, but there's one thing that we do know from first principles. The KT boundary, which is filled with one atom that's very unusual on Earth, but was present in that asteroid. We've never found a dinosaur skeleton above that line. So we know that that was the last kill shot for the big animals that were using lots of oxygen and eating lots of prey. And magically after that, what explodes? Mammals. Mammals are different. The only two animals that made it from an evolutionary standpoint through that last bottleneck of life, which I would like to call, since you guys use it, biophilia. What was the biophilia of the KT event? Who got favored? Theropod dinosaurs and eutherian mammals. What's the common tie for the biology group here? The common tie is both had high mitochondrial capacity. What did theropod dinosaurs become? They became flying birds. Those are the birds that you see today in Munich, downtown, when you throw the bird seed out. Who are the eutherian mammals? That's us. Those are mammals that have placentas. The only mammal that made it through that wasn't a placental-based animal was a duckbill platypus. And those animals, to this day, are still there, but they did make it through. So then you ask yourself the question, okay, this story that Jack's telling us, the thing that I saw in the last two big bottlenecks in evolutionary history, they all seem to be around a mitochondria. And this mitochondria seems like it's a big story. Now, the focus in the United States and Germany is on nuclear DNA. It's on DNA and RNA. Everybody knows that. You always hear, oncologists or doctors or this is a genetic issue and da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah, for me the same. With psoriasis, it's genetic. It's all genetic.
Right. So you start to ask the question, well, why is it that we have this focus on nuclear DNA? I will tell you the main answer is because centralized systems in the world, specifically Big Pharma, thought it was a very good way to control the system. And they took full advantage of that in the early 20th century. And then we got the idea. Every sickness, you would get a pill. So for every pill, there's an ill. And that is actually the system that Germans and Americans grew up in. And predominantly, both of our countries have actually leveraged that and take advantage of that through Big Pharma. I don't think that's controversial at all. I think that's
functional medicine as well. I think I couldn't get out of this.
I don't want to talk about them. Yeah. I don't want to talk about them because they come later. They're a new kind of criminal, but I don't want to go there. I want to stay on the path that we're on here because we're staying very much what people know as first principles. Nothing I've told you yet is going to confound you. So where I was going before, you heard those two bottlenecks. Mitochondria is a big part of the story. So ask yourself the question, how much information does your primary care doctor, your trainers, your food gurus know about how mitochondria work? And this is what I'm going to tell you. When you read Nick Lane's book, he's going to tell you a couple of very interesting key points. Okay, so when you read it, I want to make sure you write this down. Mitochondria on the inner mitochondrial membrane has a 30 million volt charge. It sounds crazy. That's the same charge that's in a bolt of lightning. But the reason why this is important is because you know that the inner mitochondrial membrane is only 6 microns. The reason why, if you know anything about Ohm's law, again, now here comes the basic physics you learn in high school and college. When you shrink the scale, the electromagnetic force gets stronger. So that's the reason why Nick Lane's point holds. Now, here's the other big thing that you need to understand. It seems that the terminal electron acceptor in mitochondria or oxygen. And what does that do? In the beginning of mitochondria, meaning the beginning of the inner mitochondrial membrane, it's called cytochrome 1. That name, for most people, I think you guys know, is NAD positive, NADH. At this end is oxygen. What's in between? That is what we call oxidative phosphorylation. I think everybody who knows basic biology knows this is true. This is the basic wiring diagram of the inner mitochondrial membrane. Here's where it gets interesting. Nobody in centralized medicine ever asked themselves the question about Nick Lane's book and said, why is it or how do we protect ourselves from 30 million volt charge on the inner mitochondrial membrane? Because, in Germany, if you guys have a storm or you have an earthquake or, whatever. If a power line falls down and it's got a big voltage, nobody's going to go over there and grab it and hold it, right? You're going to call the power company up and you're going to say, hey, maybe you need to turn the electricity off so that nobody gets electrocuted and dies. So the question I ask you from reading Nick Lane's book, how does mitochondria do it? What's the innovation that mitochondria used? And you know what the answer was? One of the cytochromes called cytochrome C oxidase, which is a heme-based protein, makes deuterium-depleted water. And you go, now why is that important? Now, deuterium-depleted water is not something you generally hear about in centralized medicine. That is pure water. Yes. And now this is where, forget about high school, college. Now this is third grade. Water is the best insulator on the planet when it's pure. So guess what nature decided to do? She decided to cover the inner mitochondrial membrane with deuterium-depleted water. Why? To insulate the 30 million volt charge. Okay? Now remember what I told you. To the soccer goal, NAD, oxygen. Cytochrome C oxidase is in between there. So the question you have to ask yourself, what happens when in between the goals gets destroyed by some reason? What happens when you lose the water protection and the 30 million volt charge is bouncing all over the place? Because you and I and all your clients, I can't turn off their energy because if I do that, they're dead, right? That's my problem in biology as a doctor, correct? So you have to ask yourself, okay, how do mitochondria deal with this problem over time? And what are the results? So here's the interesting part. Mitochondria is only made from 37 genes. Out of the 37 genes, 11 are tied to those cytochrome proteins that are between the goalposts on the mitochondria. Here's the interesting part that you'll also learn from Nick Lane's book. This is the second big thing you want to write down. Mitochondria are subject to 1,000-fold the amount of mutations that nuclear DNA is exposed to. So that makes the question you should ask, why is it that centralized medicine focuses on the stable genome, but not the unstable genome that actually makes the energy? That's conundrum one, okay? Then you say to yourself, well, I know every time my doctor, I go to see him and I have ADHD or a sleep disorder, they give me a drug like Adderall, melatonin, or something else, and they tell me, hey, this will take care of it, but they never explain to me exactly how this happens. I take the medication. Sometimes I do good. Sometimes I don't do good. I go back to see the doctor, and then I talk to the doctor and say, why is this happening to me? Why, if it doesn't get better, then the sleep disorder devolves into something else, or say the ADHD devolves into something else. And then what do they do in the centralized paradigm? They give you another drug. They give you another prescription, say, hey, try this. But they never actually get down to the brass tacks. What's the brass tacks? What is happening at the mitochondrial level that's allowing for this to happen? And see, that is where decentralized medicine comes in. So we focus in on what happens to each one of those genes that controls those proteins between the goals, okay? And you'll be very surprised to know that when you focus in on those proteins, there's a couple of other unique things you find. Almost every single one of those proteins that's coded for by the 11 genes, all are heme-based. What does that mean? Remember, what's inside your red blood cells called hemoglobin, but most people don't realize that those proteins are all heme-based. Here's where it gets interesting. Do you know that all of them also have an emission and absorption spectra? What does that mean? It means they absorb certain parts of light and they emit certain parts of light. For example, the one that I think most people in this podcast could easily discover, cytochrome 1, which is NAD positive NADH. It has a classic absorption spectra of 340 nanometer light. What is that? That's UV light. Okay, everybody can look that up. It's not a shock. Cytochrome 2 absorbs blue light and it emits red light. And then what does cytochrome C oxidase where water is made? That special water, the deuterium depleted water, that's all red light. It loves red light. It loves red light like you can't imagine red light. And then when you get to the fifth cytochrome, which is I think everybody else knows, ATP, where you make ATP, doctors in the centralized system, they know a lot about ATP. They don't know everything. But what I'm about to tell you, most of them don't know, 99.9%. But guess what? It's published in their literature in 2004, Nature, that red light makes the ATPase spin at 100% efficiency. It's a quantum nano roto torque engine. So then you have to now ask yourself the question. Now that we're talking about this wiring diagram on the intermitochondrial membrane, and it seems like red light and UV light's playing a big role here, where do we get our light? Well, if you think about the Cambrian explosion and you think about the KT event, the light came from the sun, right? So let's stay on the evolutionary path. Turns out our sun is a G-class star. G-class star makes 43% red light. Okay, so that checks out. The physics, the heliosphere, the solar system fits. What also fits? In the mid-age of a G-class star, they begin to emit 10% more UV light. Ooh, that's interesting. A lot of people don't know that, especially in the centralized paradigm. Well, that could explain why one of the goalposts in mitochondria is 340 nanometer light. Okay? So it appears that there's some type of link to light to how the mitochondria work. That is very well thought out in the decentralized paradigm. Everybody in the centralized paradigm that's present in America and Germany, not so much. You know, that information doesn't really scale down to the clinics when you go see the doctor and you have ADHD or you have sleep problems. So along comes 1990s, 2000s, some papers start to get done, and we find out that blue light exposure, which now I think everybody in Germany knows, through Tesla building the power grid, AC power grid in 1893, the world, I think it was the world, I forget what they called it. But anyway, it was, Yeah, the World's Fair. That's it. Thank you. The World's Fair with Westinghouse, they begin to illuminate the planet. The dominant part of light is no longer solar. It's actually artificial light by man. And this starts out first in big European cities, big cities in the United States, and then it spreads everywhere. Today, Germany, United States, we have light 24/7. Now, you have to ask yourself the question, is that light the same as the light from the sun? Well, you can easily check this. It's not really hard to do. You buy a spectroscope from China, check the light, and then you check the sun and go, oh, wow, that's kind of different. It looks different. Then you should ask yourself the next question. Since the mitochondria has light antennas in it, how does this affect the mitochondria? So along comes 2000, and this is more for large people now. They start publishing a lot of paper in the circadian journals that blue light somehow seems to ruin your sleep. And they keep looking at it and they find out, hey, did you know that blue light ruins melatonin in your cells? Then they find out in about 2005, a guy named Zimmerman, that mitochondria make 95% of the melatonin in the human body. It's not what the functional medicine doctors tell you or the centralized doctors tell you.
Yes.
It's actually the mitochondria makes it. And then you go back and you listen to the story that I just told you and you go, hey, that's kind of interesting. Maybe this could be the reason why people have problems with sleep. Now, let's jump over to Benny's guys in ADHD. We find out in about 2005 to 2008 that we have this special pathway in our eye, okay? This pathway is called the central retinal pathway. As a neurosurgeon, I know this pathway very well because I have to learn it inside and out to be a neurosurgeon. This pathway goes to two places. The first order neurons go from the retina through the optic nerve to the SCN. The SCN, I think most of you know, suprachiasmatic nucleus. This controls all of your circadian biology. The second place it goes, very, very interesting for Benny's people. This is called the habenular nucleus. This is a relay in the hypothalamus, and this relay radiates right into the frontal lobes. Okay? The frontal lobes are the new part of territory that we got from our cousins, the monkeys and the gorillas. Okay? This is right here. If you look at a picture of a monkey, you see their head is flat above their eyes. They don't have this real estate there. Okay? So the habenular nucleus brings this blue light directly to your frontal lobes, and guess what it does? It radiates to all the different places. Then magically, in 2005 to 2008, a guy named Nicholas Burson, who you may have heard of from the Huberman podcast I did with Rick Rubin, that he tells Andrew Huberman, you're not going to believe this, but we have amphibian blue light detectors in our brain. We have just found this in humans. The name of that opsin is called melanopsin. So I want you guys to start to write all that down too, because this is important. Then between 2008 and 2017, many papers come out about melanopsin. Then we find out actually how blue light exposure through melanopsin causes damage in a neurologic system. Okay? All opsins, doesn't matter which one it is, neuropsin, melanopsin, rhodopsin, all the opsins that you probably have heard of. But what happens? The opsin breaks free of something called vitamin A. Turns out when the vitamin A is free, it destroys things. Papers come out for Lars people, shows that freed vitamin A destroys your sleep. Like, okay, there's another story. Many people for ADHD, when it comes out, it destroys all the pathways that it goes. So people that have ADHD have a problem in their hypothalamus, but in the middle part, right here, of their frontal lobes, you know what that's called? It's called the limbic circuit. The limbic circuit is what controls emotions.
Yeah.
And then out here is what controls your behavior. In other words, planning your behavior. So ADHD is associated with OCD, which you know is another
also
condition.
Depression often.
Absolutely. Look, this is what the frontal lobe is all about.
Yeah.
And what does the frontal lobe specialize in humans? Dopamine and melatonin. And remember, I just told Lars before, hey, blue light is known to destroy melatonin. So now we are beginning into the mechanisms now. So you fast forward from 2008 to 2017, we're finding out a lot of information about this. And then magically, a paper shows up that shows us that, hey, blue light destroys all photoreceptors in the non-visual circuit. But here's the big one. The big one is anyone that's based or based on heme-based proteins. Why should that wake up some of the centralized German people? Well, I want you to open up a biochemistry book, Centralized, and find out where's hemoglobin or heme proteins first made. What's the first step? You know where it's made? In your mitochondria. Oh, that's kind of interesting. That means if the first step is in the mitochondria and blue light destroys the mitochondria to lead to all these problems, how do we fix the problem? Do we fix it from
Food.
Mars pills? Do we give people melatonin? Or, Benny, do we give them, Ritalin and ADHD meds? Does that work?
Or better food, maybe.
Or better food?
Yeah.
It turns out mitochondria have absorption and emission spectra. So then that brings the point up, could this be a light-based disease? Could it be tied to the way mitochondria handle the light environment? And I told you, we changed the environment on Earth to go from a solar-based economy to an artificial light-based economy. Could that have a role? So from 2017 all the way to 2025, where we are now, Uncle Jack began to take the biochemistry, the mitochondrial medicine, the biophysics, the physics, and put it all together. Yeah. So what is the real cause? So I want you to be very, very clear, because I know your audience is centralized and they're beginning to understand why.
I'm guilty too.
I want to understand this. Everybody's had this experience in Germany in the last 4 or 5 years because of COVID. So you go, you visit a friend admitted to the ICU. The whole hospital is blue lit. The wards are tightly sealed. Not a breath of fat there, fresh air from outside. The sun has to fight its way in, but the glass is thick and that blocks the full spectrum of the solar light. The Wi-Fi routers are on. The medical equipment is blasting EMS 24/7. Every surface is sterilized. There's no bacteria there. The air feels dead. There's no net negative ions. There's no grounding allowed. All the air in the hospital is recycled with chemicals to make sure it's sterilized. The machines beep all night long. They have lights on them all the time. The walls are white, gray, and lifeless. The only greenery, those are plastic plants in the corner that collects dust. The oxygen is pumped through machines. There's not a single place where you get fresh air. The doors are locked as if nature is the enemy. There's no biophilia. How can we call this a healing place? In fact, it almost appears when you look at this and your brain is not French fried, that maybe centralized medicine is telling us that nature is the enemy. So when you go to this place, at least in the United States, you generally go broke because it's so expensive. And the data tells us that they're not really good at fixing any of the problems for chronic disease. I didn't say that. Bobby Kennedy said that. You guys know in Germany, you've heard about him. So it's not a controversial statement. So where does the controversy come? You have to figure out what's happening on the inner mitochondrial membrane that may be tied to this story that I'm laying you out. So on Earth today, blue light is unequal in artificial light. It's not the same as it is in sun. So if you had a spectroscope, you know that. So what I want you to do, remember we talked about the soccer goal, NAD and oxygen here. Well, if you put NAD plus over NADH, that equals pyruvate lactate. That's for the food guys that like this. But what's the next biophysics step? That puts a logarithmic function of pH over equilibrium constant. So what does that mean in English? Basically that a mitochondria is an electronic device. And somehow it's using light to control its electronics. Whose idea is that? Not Jack Kruse. That actually is Robert Becker's idea. And this is the thing that Michael Levin and Martin Picard are starting right now. So when you understand that the human body really is an electronic device, how do you scale from electronics to basic biology? It's pretty simple. You open up the biochemistry book that they have in Germany, like we have in the United States, and the cellular biology book says that cells are designed to run at a pH between 7.35 and 7.45. That's not controversial. Did you know, though, in the physics world, that pH is a measure of voltage in a solution? I bet you didn't know that because I know your doctors don't. And then here's the interesting thing. A pH of 7.35 is the same as minus 20 millivolts of an electron donor, where 7.45 is minus 25 millivolts of an electron donor. And then you should do a hard stop and realize, what do mitochondria really do? They transfer electrons and protons along that membrane that Jack told us about, that Nick Lane says has 30 million volts. Okay? So if you put an electrode inside a cell membrane, one side of the membrane you'll measure is about negative 90 millivolts. Here's the interesting thing. The goalpost of mitochondria, NAD positive to oxygen, you know what the voltage change is? Plus 400 millivolts to negative 400 millivolts. Begin to start to see that really a mitochondria is a photobioelectric membrane that transfers information from our environment to the cell, and then the cell makes decisions about what to do. So this brings us to 2008 to 2025. What did Jack Kruse do in decentralized medicine? He figured out how it all fits. This is something that first was discovered by a guy, I believe, who's German, Otto Warburg. You remember him? Everybody
Didn't know him.
Long time ago, 1924.
Yeah.
And everybody in centralized medicine, the guys in Germany, United States, believe that Warburg shift only happens in cancer. Here's one problem for that. Do you know that the human retina around the fovea, where we have sharp vision, also uses a Warburg metabolism? Hard stop. You're like, wait a minute. If the centralized doctors tell us it's always a cancer thing, how come everybody doesn't have cancer in their eye? Tells you that maybe they're missing something. So this was my clue of how to figure out the problem. Because remember, when you're a decentralized thinker, you use first principle thinking. Let's go from what we know to what we don't know, and let's solve for X. This is just like algebra, okay?
Yeah.
So that's what I did. So I found out that artificial light created by Tesla and all the light bulbs that Edison made and that have been switched now to LEDs, this is all non-native EMF. They have a very special voltage and spectrum. It turns out that non-native EMF induces pH shifts that drive the Warburg shift in mitochondria. Here's the interesting part.
Where did you find that out? Just by reading papers?
My own head.
From your own head, yeah, okay.
Correct. In other words, this is just like Einstein.
Yeah.
Einstein figured out the ultraviolet catastrophe, because, I'm assuming you guys are German, so you should know a little bit of this history. Helmholtz and Hertz in the late 1800s came up with something with the ultraviolet catastrophe. And this was driving physics crazy at the time. So this crazy little guy named Einstein burned Swiss patent. He looked at all the thermodynamic givens and said, okay, what explains the ultraviolet catastrophe? He comes up with a paper in 1905 that you may have heard of called the photoelectric effect. Yeah. Eventually, in 1922, he wins a Nobel Prize for that. How did he do it? Benny, I want you to go back and look at the paper sometime. There's no footnotes on the bottom.
Yeah.
None. You know why? Because he figured it out by looking at the thermodynamic givens. Why am I taking a random walk backwards? Because guess what? I'm telling you. How did I figure out this problem in biology? I did it the exact same way. And I even gave you a big clue. And I know a lot of your Germans probably didn't watch the Danny Jones podcast, but I told you in that podcast about a girl that I operate on for 24 hours.
Wow, yeah, that was super amazing. Yeah.
Right. So when you hear that story, that was the first day of my life in 1998 that I came up with this idea. And I did something in her that I threw my staff doctor out of the room. I almost got fired for it, but it's tied to this story. So I realized at that time that between cytochrome 1 and oxygen, everything between there in this little girl's brain is broken. I said, that means that oxygen is going to kill her. And it also means that 30 million volts is going everywhere all over her body. Like there's no insulation to help it. I said, I need to do two things. The rest of her body needs the electricity to work because I'm working on the damaged brain. I said, I need to figure out how to keep the electric current going for all the other organs while I fix the one that's broken. And I realized what I had to do. I had to insulate the broken wires in the head. So what did I use to do that? I changed her IV fluid to something called hypertonic saline. That's 3% because, most of us, we have 0.9% sodium chloride. Why is that important? Because it conducts electricity better. So that would help her heart. It would help her organs, but it doesn't help her brain. Then I had to do something really unusual in 1998 that not a lot of people know about. I started to give her a bunch of methylene blue. What does methylene blue do? Remember the story that Nick Lane told us about the 30 million volts? I had to stop that electricity from going everywhere. So I gave her methylene blue for pretty much the whole night. In fact, when I was done, the hospital had no methylene blue left. What does that do? It protects the voltage in the brain while I'm working to take all the bone fragments out. And of course, if you listen to the podcast for Danny Jones, you can hear the end of that. That's not what this podcast is about. This podcast is how did I figure out why everybody in Germany who Benny takes care of has ADHD and why everybody Lars takes care of has sleep problems. This is the reason why. Because guess what? You have a Warburg shift in those parts of your brain, and it's driven by the light and the water and the magnetism you allow. And you need to understand the two things I told you before about the endpoints, how NAD and oxygen really work, the span of the voltage between it. So The prediction that I made that night while I was in surgery is that you take any big city anywhere in the world, tons of non-native EMF. So this is intensified. Why? Because we are pumping in the EMF to the ionosphere. This is how we get to listen to the radio, the TV, the internet, all that stuff is being pumped in. What does this effectively do? It alters the pH in the body, drives it below 7.35. What does that do? That causes a Warburg shift in the brain. Okay? This causes cognition to crash. What's the mechanism? The mechanism is found in Dr. Doug Wallace's work and Michael Levin's work. It activates something called voltage-gated channels. This is due to calcium influx. What's the eventual cause? ROS and RNS, which you guys have heard of. Remember, we don't need to get into the deep science, but I'm giving you the mechanism of how I figured this out.
Yeah.
That drives hydroxyl-free radicals and nitrogen radicals. And what does this do? It disrupts the NAD positive NADH ratio. What does it do? It lowers NADH so you can't make the flow to oxygen. So I realized, wow, this is a big deal. And it made me also realize that the little girl, while I was operating her, is like Lars's guys. It's like a night owl. That the blue light exposure from her brain, from me shining the lights while I'm fixing it from the trauma, was causing a huge problem. And I realized that this was amplifying more damage, not only in her brain, but also in her retina, all the photoreceptors. Now, here's the key thing. Remember I told you before about the photoreceptors. So again, for my German audience, open up the biochemistry book. Let's talk about all the heme proteins that eventually are made in these broken mitochondria. That's your porphyrins. What is that? That's hemoglobin. All the mitochondrial cytochromes, every single one of them are heme protein. What else? Catalase in your blood. That's another one. Melanin in your RPE in your eye, also in your skin. What's another one? We discovered in 2009, neuropsin. What's another one? I just told you. Discovered in 98. Big news in 2014 and 2017. We found it. It's present everywhere. Our skin, our fat, our brain, it's everywhere. That's the blue light detector. Okay, Lars, you ready? The next one, melatonin and dopamine. And that gets you poor sleep and crazy behavior. Oh, wait a minute. Benny, that's your guys too. That's your guys too. And here's the big one. The next one is nitric oxide, which you make generally from sunlight, from UVA sunlight. What does it do? I think classically everybody in Germany has probably heard of Richard Weller. He's in Edinburgh, top of the island over there. He did a very famous TED Talk that said, hey, I'm a dermatologist at a high latitude. Maybe we need to let people go in the sun more because we can lower their blood pressure. I couldn't believe when he said it. I was like, wow, this guy, he wakes up. But you want to know what happens? Blue light destroys nitric oxide. But here's the bigger part of that story that nobody talks about in centralized medicine. Do you know what else nitric oxide does? It controls your stem cells depot. So what does that mean? When you have brain damage like this little girl had that I was taking care of, if you destroy the nitric oxide, how can you get better? You have no stem cells. So this is a huge problem. What else does it destroy? It destroys B12 cycles. Oh, so you think about all those people going to the functional medicine doctor, getting put on supplements for this problem when it's really light that causes it. Then what's the other one? Folate. Well, why is that a big deal in centralized medicine? Every German who is married, who has a wife who had a baby or getting ready to have a baby, you know that the doctors put you on folate in the prenatal vitamins. You know why? Because everybody's blue lit. That's the reason why. These are all the human photoreceptors that are tied to this story. But here's the big one. Here's the big one for both Benny and Lars people in Germany. Rev, Erb, alpha, and beta are the circadian heme nuclear receptors. Guess what that does? All the circadian biology is boom. Boom. It's gone. So when you hear this, you begin to go, so is this the reason why Lars and Benny have people who go to the centralized doctor to get the melatonin, to get the Ritalin, and they don't get better because they didn't get told any of the stuff that I'm telling you right now. They certainly didn't understand what the key that non-native EMF does to mitochondria. It's very simple. It dehydrates you because what does it do? It destroys your ability to make water at cytochrome C oxidase. What did I tell you from Nick Lane? That big part between NAD, that means the electric current goes everywhere. So this is like straight dirty electricity in your house. You can't control it. What does that do? It causes damage everywhere else. So when this happens in the cell, what does the cell do? It uses the light stimulus to shift metabolism from the TCA cycle to glycolysis. Why is this important? Remember the story how we started the podcast? That's exactly what bacteria and archaea do. So what is the cell doing when it has light stress? Trying to protect itself so that it can maintain its life as long as possible until the German who's got this problem goes back in the sun. That's it.
I have one question to the UVA, because Lars and me, we talked before about the effects of different wavelengths, and we talked about the UVA and how it helps with nitric oxide. But you just said, like, but if you still use the blue light all the time, the effect is not there so much, or it's even...
It's like this. It's like anything else. I want you to think about it. I'm trying to make it really simple for you to understand for your audience. It's like two hoses. If you put the hoses on at the same, they offset. But what if you put one on more than the other? That's the life that you live in Germany. Too much blue, not enough purple. So effectively, it's blue light. Now, what did I tell you from Nicholas Burson and Huberman in the podcast I did? You have now blue light detectors everywhere. Like we found out melanopsin isn't just in your brain. It's everywhere. It's in your subcutaneous fat. It's in your skin. It's in your arteries. It's everywhere.
So when I'm looking now on my screen, I'm getting the UV from the sun, but I also get the blue light. So
correct.
You think that's at least at best balance, so that people can get maybe something out of it. It's not the best, of course, but is it better than inside?
I think everybody in Germany needs to do what a lot of people in the United States are doing now. They use Flux. They use what do you call it? Iris. But here's the big one: daylight computer. I mean, one of my members, a young guy who, Benny, you know, he had depression and ADHD. So what did he do? He decided to make a new computer, first one since Apple made a computer that is completely subtracts the blue light. To me, if you have a sleep problem and you have a problem with ADHD, this computer should be your major default computer. Or you can do what Uncle Jack's doing right now, or Benny's doing now. Now what Lars is doing. What Lars is doing is bad. He's inside with the red light on. You want to be outside.
Maybe his window is open. I hope so.
Well, maybe, but you know, I know it's like 8 hours later in Germany right now than it is in El Salvador. But the other thing I want to make sure that people understand is that the daylight computer allows you to see the screen even in bright sunlight. This is something I think people don't really know yet in Germany. So there now are solutions for people that have the problems that you guys are trying to get them through. But what I want you to know is the single key to blue light for both of the diseases that you treat is that there's dehydration from the non-native EMF. And what does that do? It lowers the electrical resistance and alters the pH. Now, Martin Picard and Michael Levin, two researchers, just put an article out about this very issue. So when you understand what Uncle Jack did in 1998 for that little girl to save her life, I used methylene blue to increase the electrical resistance. So the question to both of you should be to me, Jack, what does that normally in our system? That's what melanin does, okay? Melanin actually does some very interesting things. And this is what people don't understand. Everybody knows about melanin being in our skin. People know about being in our brain. You know, they know that it's tied to the substantia nigra and dopamine and Parkinson's.
In Germany, it's just people just think it's the brown pigment of our skin. That's it.
Right. And that's great. I don't care what you think.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you what it does because this is important. What melanin effectively does, it dampens current. So you have to realize when sunlight comes in and you have Nick Lane's 30 million volts, guess what melanin does when it's hydrated? It dampens the current to 1/trillionth of 1 ampere. Why is this important?
Wow. Yeah.
Robert O. Becker found that the regenerative current in all mammals, that means every mammal listening to this in Germany, every mammal in El Salvador, and every mammal in the United States, this is a universal law. This is not, and nobody is immune to this.
Yeah.
If you don't make that current, you don't heal. Okay? Are you beginning to see how the electronics of light and electricity on that inner mitochondrial membrane, boy, they control a lot of things. It controls all the heme proteins, controls the melatonin cycle. It even controls how enzymes are able to work. Like when you really parse it down and get to it. So I started to take all these points together and started to really look at my patients. And I started to find out that everybody who lived in a non-native EMF world that's blue lit, which is 99% of the world, now is allergic to oxygen. Now, that's the part that's going to shock people when they hear it. But I'm going to explain to you why this makes sense. Remember the story I told you, the first two domains of life. The environment used to be anoxic. That's the reason why they used the Warburg metabolism back then, because it wasn't present. So what's happening now is oxygen from non-native EMF is being broken down. When we pump that in to the ionosphere, we are effectively not able to use the TCA cycle really well. And when we're not able to use the TCA cycle, what happens? We don't make as much water to protect ourselves from the 30 million volts. That means we're electrocuting ourselves on the inside. How does the nerves work? That electric current goes wherever the nerves take it, and that causes a TBI in that area. Benny, that's what's happening to your guys. It happens right where the ADD centers are in the limbic system.
I have a quick question, Jack. You said like we're getting through non-native EMF, we allergic to oxygen. Is it still possible to do like maybe breath holds or like CO2 tolerance training or is it a bad idea?
Do me a favor. You're really ruining this right now. Don't make this more complicated. The people in Germany need to hear what I just said and let it sink in. Okay. Don't worry about what the solution is.
Yeah.
Let's understand first how big the problem is. Okay?
Right, yeah.
Because guess what happens? This means that oxygen is a problem for people that are toxic. Why? Let's go back to the soccer analogy. NAD and oxygen. What do you know about oxygen? All my good Germans know the periodic table. You go pull it out. Oxygen is extremely electronegative. There's only one atom on the periodic table that is more electronegative. That's fluoride. What does electronegative means? It means it loves electrons. So what happens between NAD and oxygen? It's pulling electrons across all this broken stuff. You know what happens when you do that? ROS and RNS goes through the roof. That's the reason you guys get the diseases you get. Forget about worrying about how to fix it. Understand first how it was broken.
True.
And fix the problem first there, and then worry about everything left. Your big problem is your addiction to the things that breaks everything between those two goalposts. You cannot score a goal. You cannot have a good life.
True.
You cannot get your life back until you fix the big problem in the between. Got it?
Got it. Yeah.
That is light, water, and magnetism to explain exactly how both of your clients have the problem you have. And I gave you a discoverable way for you to go back and fact check Uncle Jack.
Yeah, we were very grateful for that. So many science backups now you gave us. For me, I was asking the question to understand the mechanism more, like why.
I don't want you to understand it right now. It's a podcast. This isn't about you. It's about the audience. I'm serious about this.
Okay.
You need to take what I just told you, and you need to go read those books before you jump right away and say, okay, I'm going to help you with this. No. Everybody that's in the audience knows what the problem is. They're all addicted to technology. They just didn't realize how bad the addiction was. So if you want to know why Kurt Cobain, Jimi Hendrix, and all those people died, that's the reason why. Because they played their music and the electric stuff at night. Why did they become addicted? Why? Because they had to use the opiates because this system works on a system that you do learn about. POMC. POMC is where melanin's made. What else is made there? Beta endorphin. Well, guess what? If you destroy beta endorphin, right? Beta endorphin is designed to addict us to sunlight. You don't addict to sunlight, become a rock star, you stay up all night, and what happens? You cause this problem. You cause the Warburg shift. So what do you try to do? You try to use drugs to offset the beta endorphin you don't have and the metenkephalin you don't have. And guess what happens? You die.
Yeah.
In other words, it's an addiction as well, but you don't realize the proximal addiction, because of the Warburg shift, is a light-mediated phenomenon. It's not a food phenomenon like the cancer guys try to tell you in the centralized paradigm.
Yeah.
It's a photoelectric biologic effect. Oh, wait a minute. We're back to Uncle Albert, aren't we? But you didn't know that we know the truth, but you know what the problem is? We're not putting the lessons together. That's why I stopped you right away and said, no. You're not going to jump to all this other bullshit. You need to understand the key mechanism first before you do anything. Because when you fix a broken building, let's make this really, really good for Germans to understand. After World War II, when your country was destroyed, right, you have a process that it got rebuilt. Exactly what I'm telling you now. Nobody in Germany probably in the 1940s and 50s really liked that process because they had Berlin split down the middle, but the west side of Berlin regenerated perfectly. Do you know what the east side of Berlin was? That's when you lose the 1 trillionth of 1 amp. It took way longer till 1991 for that side of Berlin and that side of Germany to heal. That's exactly what ADHD is in your patients, and that's exactly what bad sleep is there. Because guess what? If you remove the blue light, you only fix one part of the coin. Then you have to bring in the 1 trillionth of 1 amp. What does that mean? That's where you got to rehydrate melanin. And how do you do that? You need UV and IR light from the sun, not from the light bulbs of Siemens or Western Electric or General Electric or Apple or Microsoft or Google, which every German right now, they are as addicted as the people in the United States. This is the key to solving for X for both. That's the key. That's what you should focus on. Do not go anywhere else until you understand this axiomatic. If you cannot do this, do not do anything else. Do not take a supplement. Do not take a pill, because it will not work. It'll make the situation worse, because that's what we found in centralized medicine.
Yes. This is where I want to go, to understand it more and more. And I'm happy to have you bringing me here. And then since I'm here in El Salvador, I realized how addicted I was to many things in life. Also drugs, whatever, but also always started with the blue light. And since I'm more in the sun, I don't have the feeling or the soak anymore for all this stuff, and I feel like where my addiction actually should go. And as you said, like all ADHD people or who have these diagnoses, they are prone to addiction, obviously, and also the sleep.
Now you know the reason why. But you know the reason why, because the normal currents that are in them don't make beta endorphin, don't make metenkephalin. Why? Because it turns out from where that damage is, where the TBI goes, that electric or the electrocuting power knocks out the neurons in that part of the frontal lobe. That's why they get the problem. So when you realize this, then you realize why drugs are the stupidest thing you could ever think of. If you blew out neurons, how is a drug going to fix that? What you need is an electrician. Guess what? That's what decentralized medicine is. I am a bioelectrician. And I explained to you that you can't stop at the bioelectricity. See, that's where Michael Levin stops. You have to realize that we do it from light. So you have to realize light is extremely powerful. Anybody who's German knows, you look at the sunlight, it makes your eyes go. You say, how do we turn all that power in the sun to electricity? I just told you the most amazing thing. You can go in physics right now and you look at the paper. It says when melanin is dehydrated, it becomes a spectacular conductor of electricity. But guess what? When you put in water, it becomes terrible. Well, guess what? Mother Nature got that idea 65 million years ago. And did I tell that story in the Huberman podcast for 10 hours to Rick Rubin and him? I did. But guess what, my friend Benny? You may not have realized I've been telling you bits and pieces in every podcast I did. So what did I just tell Europe and Germany? How all those podcasts fit into this podcast. That is the reason why your two guys have the problem they got. That's it.
Yeah, you bring it all together. Lars, do you have a question? You were so quiet.
One thing about sleep apnea, because it's right that the CPAP machines are actually doing more harm than good regarding the more oxygen, right?
Yeah. Lars, I like that question because guess what? It tells me that you were paying attention when Uncle Jack was talking. Because guess what? I'll explain something else for the audience because I know the audience probably doesn't have these problems, but let's make it very, very simple. Sleep apnea is the brainstem telling you need to protect the most valuable parts of the brain from what I just told Benny. Remember, Benny's people have the limbic system that's in the frontal lobe. Your brainstem is where all your autonomic functions come from. You knock that out, you go to a coma. So sleep apnea is telling you got a lot of TBIs from this mechanism everywhere else. So you got Warburg metabolism everywhere. So when you use a sleep apnea machine, what does it do? It uses positive pressure to increase oxygen. Well, guess what that does? Remember all the damages here? It's pulling electrons. It's going to make more TBIs. So the answer is, for sleep apnea, not to use a machine. The answer is, hey, maybe we should leave Munich and go to Canary Islands. And maybe we should go get our tan so that we can make the 1 trillionth of 1 ampere to renovate the melanin in our brains so that we can regenerate this. Because here's the good thing. If you do this, the sleep apnea will go away. So I'm telling you, sleep apnea is a protection mechanism of the brain. So that brings us to another point. Maybe now you can understand what cataracts really are. It's the same thing. It's a protection system that the brain is trying to do because you look into the screen too much. I'll give you another one. That's what tinnitus is. Tinnitus is another protection system to warn you that the environment is bad. Most people in Germany, guarantee you don't know this, you have a melanin sheet inside your cochlea. You also have melanin in your semicircular canals. So guess what happens? The body and the brain is warning you you're going to blow out all your acoustic relays if you keep putting the Apple things in your ears, kind of like you two are doing right now. You can see I don't do it. Why? Because I understand this. So tinnitus is a protection mechanism. What is the protection mechanism in the semicircular canals? Meniere's disease. And guess what happens if Meniere's, you don't pay attention? What's the next thing you get? Acoustic neuroma. Oh, that's my world. That's what I deal with. So what does that tell me as the neurosurgeon? I know just how bad the environment is if you have these problems because I can use what I learned in medical school and residency because I know the somatotopic map of the brain. So I know exactly where the problem is likely coming from. So can I prove this to you guys? Yeah, most people know that I use MRIs. Once I believe that I know what the problem is, I can look directly for the damage. And guess what magically happens in my patients? I find the things the centralized doctors can't. You know why? Because I know better. I know the mechanism that I just told you in this podcast, and I figured it out 20 years ago, even before the papers were written. Why? Because this is important for your audience to hear. You already know the story of Einstein. Nobody knew the science before Einstein, but what did he do? He took the thermodynamic givens known in the environment, and he reverse engineered the process. That's exactly what I did. No different. Exactly the same thing. The difference is biology is a little bit more complex than just figuring out the light story that Einstein did. Biology is really complex. And then you begin to see now, in 1905, we didn't have a lot of people using the electromagnetic spectrum. Today, we do. And we use it in ways that we don't understand are counterintuitive to the way evolution built the mitochondrial membrane. And when you understand that, you start to go, I need to come up with a really good way to use technology so that it doesn't hurt me. Why? Because when that 30 million volt current gets out in your brain, this is like a kamikaze pilot going to different parts of your brain to cause different diseases. This is the reason why Lars, some people can get sleep problems. Other people
Mm.
can get sexual problems. Guys get their hair fall out. What does the big pharma guys say? Hey, use this drug finasteride. It'll keep your hair in. Well, guess what that does? Then you get holes in your hypothalamus. Then some ladies get Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Other people get problems in the arcuate nucleus and the choroid of their eye, and they get obesity. Like, blue light is associated with all these things. Like, everybody in the audience right now, they don't need to believe me. They can look all of this up, and they're going to go, God damn it, Jack's right. Look at this. But the thing that you won't see in the same papers is what I just told you, how it happens. Why? Because if we told you that, we wouldn't be able to sell you drugs. And then people in big pharma in the United States and Germany, they would not be so happy.
Yeah, it's so interesting that
you
the
understand.
studies.
So
I
why?
understand,
I'm not finished yet, Benny.
Sorry.
This
Go ahead.
is really why we have biophilia. Because guess where the decentralized pharmacy is, my friend?
Yeah, nature.
There's the answer. Got it?
Yes.
We reject the centralized pharmacy for the decentralized pharmacy.
Yeah. Lars, do you have follow-up questions for that?
Maybe one more thing. I've talked to people in the past about how they healed their sleep problems, like sleep apnea, for example, when they went away from Germany to a more tropical place, for example. Do you think for like cases of sleep apnea or other sleep diseases, it's necessary to go
I
to
think it's the easiest place, Lars, to do it outside. But the reason I want to tell this, because I know the German audience will probably watch you. You're in the red light. You're doing something good to also help your sleep apnea. So let's explain it. A paper recently came out in the last year that you guys probably have seen, that when you put red light on people, it actually improves a lot of different effects. But remember, I told you cytochrome C oxidase is what makes water, and the water is actually what protects you. So believe it or not, red light exposure is really important. So even though Germany doesn't have good latitude, what Germany does have, even every morning and before the sun sets, even when it's bad time, red light is predominant in morning and sunset light. So guess what? If you are in Germany, you need to use that light. Like, you need to get up and you need to see it. I don't care if you're tired. I don't care if your job interferes. You need to change your schedule so that morning light you get. Now, why does this work, Lars? This is the key. The paper that came out, you know what it showed? It reduces your blood glucose by 30%. What did I tell you about the Warburg shift? The Warburg shift raises glucose, doesn't it? So you should go right there and say, damn it, Jack's mechanism fits to the effects that we're even finding about red light. And what do we know about red light? That NASA told us, the European Space Unit, sunlight is 43% red. All of a sudden, you begin to see that this are the rules of physics, not the rules of bullshit. Got it? Yeah, and if you understand that, yes, the answer is, your question is an excellent one. Excellent. Yes, I do believe going to places where there's more and better light is good for you, but I also think that you can use red light when you're in Germany and you can't do it to try to help these things. But you have to remember, is LED light that the red guys sell as good? No. Why isn't it good? Because I think we need to talk about this. Red light is LED, so it's very, very narrow wavelength. And what did I tell you about cytochrome C? It has a very specific absorption and emission spectra. It turns out that absorption emission spectra is bigger than LED lights can really give you. So while it's a help, it's not a panacea. And the other thing is, sunlight is unpolarized. All LED light is polarized. What else does LED light? It has flicker. So do you remember when we talked about the two hoses before to each other? Red light from the sun and red light from an LED is not the same. So I need you to know that that's important. What's the other important part? Here's the good news I'm going to tell you about the red light you have, Lars. There's a law called the Anders-Schutz law. That's called the biphasic result. What does that mean? Small stimuli of red improves things in us. In other words, we do better with small samples than big samples. So your use of red light, when you're in Germany, you have sleep apnea, you don't have to use it for a really long time. You also don't need to have high intensity light either, okay? But when you think about all the physics that I'm laying out to you, you're going, Jack, that's a lot. You know, even for my German audience who likes engineering and is into that. Well, Lars, now do you understand why I say Just get in the sun. Sun is TINA. What does TINA stand for? There is no alternative. This is the reason why when people ask my opinion, Jack, what's the best red light to buy? There's no better answer than the sun. So like what Benny is doing right now actually answers your question. I think that that's the ultimate answer. And then here's the other side for you that I want you to know, that the more you do, like the more the sleep apnea is, that means the more time you'll have to spend. So I know this is an inconvenient truth, for some of the people in Germany that'll be listening to this, but you have to realize something. If you don't fix this problem and you already have sleep apnea, it basically predicts that you're going to have future brain damage. So this talks about, do you understand now why people are getting Alzheimer's, frontal temporal dysplasia, Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease? Here's the big one. You know what another chemical that leads to a pretty nasty disease, ALS. You know what chemical is related to that? Catalase. Remember I talked about catalase before? Do you know that catalase quenches hydrogen peroxide into water and oxygen? When that doesn't happen in neurons, guess what? You get ALS. So when you want to know, like, it's very nice to understand that sleep apnea, tinnitus, and cataracts are all predictors of future brain damage. Most people never want to get the ALS. Most people never want to get the Alzheimer's. What am I telling you, Lars, as a guy that takes care of people with sleep disorders? You need to start reading them the riot act. You know how like Uncle Jack comes on a podcast? What does he do? He punches you square in the mouth, kind of like I did a little while ago with Benny. Why? No, don't jump around. Stay on point. So you get the message loud and clear. Why? Because what's really at risk here, Lars? What's at risk is brain damage. That's what we're all really trying to avoid. And that's what I want you guys to understand, so that when you have patients come to see you in Germany, that you give them good, decentralized advice that you know the doctor is not going to give them. Why? Because we just told your audience why. They're incentivized to give drugs. You cannot make any money from the sun. Okay? This is the unfortunate truth to decentralized medicine. But what is the great news for the people who are in your audience listening to this? The sun is free. Maybe not in Germany, because you may have to go to a better place, but guess what? Even if you decide to use what you have in Germany, spending the money on a red light is probably way cheaper than a life of Ritalin or a life of melatonin or a life of sleep medicine. And certainly, I do not want people, to really use a machine that makes you worse. Because why did the sleep doctors tell you that? Because the more you use the machine, the more of a patient you become, the more they harvest money out of you. And remember what I told you in my little diatribe about centralized medicine. It's a very expensive sausage grinder to go into.
Yeah, and what you just described for sleep apnea and the following diseases, it's the same for ADHD, right? And
it's the same for every disease. This is the beautiful part of decentralized medicine. You need to understand every single cell in your body except one has mitochondria. Red blood cell is the only one that doesn't. That's it. But do you understand the red blood cell also has a problem because it's got hemoglobin in it. This is the reason why anemia of chronic disease always is associated with blue light toxicity. Always. And guess what? You ask any doctor in the centralized paradigm. I remember learning this in medical school and going, wait a minute. We got all these people that are sick, and they all have anemia. Why? And nobody could ever answer the question for me. I'm telling you, I didn't answer this question until 40 years later. If you go look in any centralized book right now in Germany, look up that disease, anemia chronic disease. They come up with all kinds of bullshit. But you know what the real answer is? The first step in heme synthesis is made in a mitochondria. If your mitochondria are failing, you can't make hemoglobin. That's it.
Yeah, it's actually, and I imagine that nobody in the world wants to have a shorter lifespan or wants to have brain damage. And it's
I think there's quite a few people that do. I mean, Brian Johnson, he's a perfect example. He does everything to hurt himself. I think the other thing, let's talk about this. I went to a Bitcoin meeting in Prague. I was
Yeah.
in Central Europe last year.
Yeah.
And what did I tell the people from the stage? Because I think this is important for you guys to hear as
Yeah.
Germans. I gave the analogy of Steve Jobs, Paul Allen, and Hal Finney.
Yeah.
These are all technologists in different fields. One guy is a software guy, the other guy's a hardware guy, and the other guy is a Bitcoin guy. All of them died of diseases that are tied to this Warburg mechanism. Every single one of them. So remember something, Benny. They were all addicted to what? Technology. And
Yeah.
nobody told them what I just told Benny and Lars and their audience. Guess what? They went to the best doctors in the centralized system, and guess what they got? They got death.
Mm.
And they died in three ways: ALS, lymphoma, and pancreatic cancer. Okay? Every single one of those tied to the same mechanism. Okay? Every single one. So when your people have just a sleep problem, or they have, say, just a ADHD problem, you need to tell them, look, nature is whispering in your ear, hey, your use, your relationship with technology, you're a technophile. You're not biophilia.
Yeah.
That's the message. And you know what? You need to keep resonating this. You don't
Yeah.
get to the answer first. You need to make sure they understand the mechanism fully. Then you tell them, okay. Then you teach them about grounding. Then you teach them about the sun. And you
Yeah.
tell them that to fix the damage, you need to have UV and IR light. The best way to do that is the sun. Here's the problem for Lars's red light. Nobody really makes a good UV and red light that's fake. But you know
Mm.
who does? The sun. The sun is spectacular at it. The problem there is in Germany, since it's high latitude and you have too many clouds from geoengineering, yeah, here's a problem. Then you don't get as much UV. So will it take longer for you to heal from ADHD or a sleep disorder in Germany? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
This is the reason why Benny comes down to El Salvador and he's like, wow, this is kind of surprising. Look, the bottom line is you have the most amazing Mercedes and BMW engineers inside your mitochondria. You know what the problem is? They don't speak German. They don't use tools. They use light. Light fixes it all, and it creates the smallest currents you could ever imagine in your head to do it. And for those of you who think this is bullshit, you go read The Body Electric by Robert O. Becker, and he is the guy that found out to heal bone, we take an electric current from our bone, and we take a red blood cell, and we turn it into a stem cell. And that stem cell regenerates the bone. That's not Uncle Jack. He did this research in the 1960s until the U.S. military put him out of business. Why? Because the U.S. military is getting ready to build technology.
More and more of that. Yeah. Yeah, it's for me, I think it's very important to bring out this word once again and once again for people, because the belief system in Germany, what I see is really like it's almost normal to have like neurodiversity or ADHD, because they don't go to the first principle of thinking. They don't go back to biophysics and understand it. And
But do you understand why?
Yeah.
It's a consequence of the system.
Yeah.
Why? Because it destroys dopamine and melatonin in your frontal lobes. So this is the reason why it's there. It's not a German problem. You know what it is?
Yeah.
Human problem, because we all have the same issue. And you need to understand, when you get that level of sophistication, then you can see that all the problems, like the social problems that we have everywhere, magically will go away if we just replace the hydrated sheets that are inside us that make this regenerative current. And for those of you who think that that is a ridiculous statement, Benny, I know you know this. I don't know if Lars does, but Doug Wallace, the guy at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, said that when you reduce the heteroplasmy rate anywhere in the body, guess what happens? The diseases magically go away. And the reason why this is important, isn't this go back to the story that I told you between the Anubians and King Tut? They lived in the same place, but not in the same environment, and they had the same diseases that we have in the modern world. Remember, the most common thing that we see in the mummies is peripheral artery disease and also bad bones. That's exactly what Becker found. So When someone in Germany who's low dopamine, low melatonin tells me this bullshit that you just did, you know what that tells me? They're not really German. You know why? Because they're not good engineers. They don't
Hmm.
understand that everything I told you in this podcast is published in the literature. Everything is there. It's got a proof. Now, it's okay. It's okay, Benny, for people not to believe it. But the people in the audience that are going to fact check this, guess what? Then you begin to realize there's certain people I shouldn't listen to. See, and evolution also teaches us that lesson too. This is the reason why we have predator and prey. Okay? Predators
Hmm.
can't live without prey. So you
Hmm.
have to realize that most of the world is working on bad thinking, not first principle thinking. And no, we shouldn't make excuses for it. What our job should be, at least in decentralized medicine, is to explain how it happens. What you need to realize that in centralized medicine, they are taking advantage of those people. And I would say to you, not only is Big Pharma taking advantage of it, in my opinion, governments all over the world are taking big advantage of this. And people don't understand that at a fundamental level. And the reason they don't is because they haven't done the first principle thinking about what the Warburg shift means to light. This is the reason I told you before we started this, I think you would be very happy with using this mechanism
Hmm.
because not only will it explain the two diseases you're interested in, that it will open up another world where you say, wow, this isn't just this problem. This explains a lot of different things. And you remember why I got into this business. I was very frustrated in centralized medicine. All the thing I was taught, I was at the top of my class. Neurosurgery is the hardest thing to get into. But when I came out after 5 years, I started to do all the things they told me, and people still didn't get better.
Hmm.
I remember what that
Mm.
funny guy from Bern said in Austria. If you keep doing the same shit over and over again, expect a different result, that's called insanity.
Sanity.
And that's exactly what centralized medicine became. And in my opinion, that's what the world is becoming because of what you just said, Benny.
Hmm.
Nobody is willing to question the paradigm. Well, I got news for you. You listen to this podcast. I don't care if you're German, Irish, Black, American, Swahili. There is a big lesson here. And this is the lesson I'm going to tell you. This is maybe how we end.
Hmm.
The wounds create the wisdom. You have to embrace the suck, the chaos. Why? Because what did Becker tell us? The wound creates the regeneration. And it's never a bad thing if you learn the lesson from the wound. You know when it is a bad thing? When you don't learn the lesson. And do I think
Mhm.
that the German people, this goes all the way down to your DNA because of what happened in the 1930s and the 1940s.
Yeah.
You still haven't learned the lesson from the wound. And the reason why this situation is the way it is in Germany and it's not that way in the United States, remember who the United States are. We are the crazy people from Britain that told the king, we're going to shoot you because you gave us 3% tax on our tea. That was it. If you
Hmm.
think about the craziness that's going on in the United States now and in Germany, man, these guys are doing way more to us. We probably should be shooting at them.
Hmm.
You know, they're sending people in to foreign countries and they're dying for no reason. So I look at it like this story of why we're having sleep problems, why we have ADHD, it has a lot of very interesting discussions
Hmm.
that should go with it. Hopefully, when people in Germany listen to this, if they liked what they heard, they fact check Uncle Jack. They say, you know, maybe he's crazy in the beginning, but the more he talked, I fact checked him and everything's right.
Makes sense.
Then maybe you go to the coffee house and start talking to your friends. No, Munich talks to Bavaria, and
Hmm.
Bavaria talks to Frankfurt. The next thing you know, we may create 20, 30,000 savages in Germany that say, you know what? Let's go talk to the people in Prague. Let's go talk to the people in France. Let's go talk to the people in Russia.
Yeah.
Maybe our problems could be solved instead of the
Yeah.
way it's being solved now. I
Yeah.
just put it this way. When you know better, you're able to think better, you're able to do better. And if this message doesn't resonate in Germany, I don't think it's going to resonate anywhere. Why? Because this is about engineering. It is a photobioelectric story of how nature engineered ourselves to do some amazing things. And when you realize that, and you realize that you're your own worst enemy because of the choices that you made around light, I don't think it's that hard to fix. I think it's kind of the thing that's the most shocking is that you go, wow, it's really that simple.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We will link all the sources you mentioned, the books and the papers we can find, so that the German and all of our audience can fact check it, and then please decide for yourself what makes sense, if it's biophilia or if it's technology. I think Jack made it pretty clear. Check it for yourself. Jack, before we end, can you please tell where people can find you and learn more about you?
Well, the best place for Germans to find me is on Twitter, on X. My social media footprint is at Dr. Jack Kruse. There's a lot of fake accounts, but that's really me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I have a website, jackkruse.com. It has a forum and that has all of this information out there. It's free. It's discoverable. And then if you want to learn about all the science that I put together that I just shared with you on this podcast, this is what I would call the Library of Alexandria for Biophysics is on my Patreon. Everything that I've told you in this podcast, you will see in blogs to link it all together. And then you go, oh, all the sites, all the things that allowed me to figure this out. The story is in a lot of podcasts. Watch the podcast. When you go back and listen, I think after your podcast, the single most important thing is for people to go look at that short that Danny Jones cut out about what happened to me the day of the little girl. And I think we'll end on this. If you want to know how I really got the message from nature, I told the story that I had Metallica's Black Album on a loop that was going on that whole night. And one song happened to come on right at the right time. And there's a little lyric in there. As soon as I heard it, I thought to myself, I need to do something different. If I keep doing what I'm doing, she's going to die. And that is what changed me. So when somebody who watches this podcast says, what was the punch in the mouth that got Jack really going? That little girl. I didn't do and change, but I was taught in centralized medicine. She dies. And you want to know the truth? If that doesn't happen that day in 1998, I can't do this podcast with Benny or Lars and tell you what the wisdom was that happened when nothing else mattered from Metallica came on and whispered in my ear. That is where the idea and the innovation came from.
Yeah, what a great final word.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jack, for your time, for your energy, for your work, and for everything you are doing. I think, it's great. It was really great to have you on here. It was an honor. And thank you.
Okay, go create some German savages. We need them.
Yeah, we need them.
Yeah, sure.
In the name of biophilia. Gracias.
And that's the other thing. Sansal just told me if any of you Germans want to come and meet me, 3 months, I'll be speaking at Bitcoin Prague again. So they do have it. I think it's June 19th to the 21st. So that's pretty close to you guys. I think it's not a big air flight.
Yeah, that's a no-brainer.
Right, exactly.
I'm happy to see
you. Take care, guys.
Take care, Jack.
Take care,
Thank you so
Jack.
much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.